what kept coming back to me as my background as a historian, is that this sort of double-edged sword is what makes civilization and everything around us sort of possible. That, on the one hand, none of us knows the workings of everything, but because we can all specialize in something, we can get all of the incredible things done that are around us. Like, even with the toilet example, we don't all have to know how a toilet works to use one and have it improve our lives. Same with our phones and the microphones we're recording this on and everything. It's all based around that sort of community of knowledge. So yeah, our ignorance is sort of a double-edged sword. It's enabled all of that as well.
That's a quick taste of my conversation this week with Sean Fenlon about a book called The Knowledge Illusion, Why We Never Think Alone, by Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach, that was published in March of 2017. It's a book with a fairly simple premise, but profound ramifications if we take that premise seriously. Essentially, it's saying that we're more ignorant than we think we are, and that as a result, we have to think as a community of human beings rather than individuals. And if we take the idea that individual thinking is essentially a myth, well then, our understanding of the world has to shift quite dramatically. My name is Ben Charland, and this is What on Earth is Going On, your weekly podcast for a world in flux. Now, before we dig into the meat of this subject, I wanted to ask you, as I always do, for a favor. If you like this show, if you enjoy listening to the guests and the subjects that we talk about, please spread the word. Tell people about it. Go to the website, www.wogoshow.com. That's WOEGO show.com. You can check out all previous episodes. All episodes going forward will be posted on that website. And give the website to your friends, post it on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or Twitter, and let people know. Also, give the show a rating, either on iTunes or on Facebook or whatever podcast app that you use. Finally, if you have any suggestions for future episodes, for guests that we can have on the show, for things that you'd like to have discussed, please let me know. Send me an email, wogoshow@gmail.com, and tell me what you think. Give me your feedback, but also your suggestions on what we should be tackling on this show. My guest this week is a friend of mine named Sean Fenlon, and neither he nor I are experts in the book that we're discussing, The Knowledge Illusion. The real experts are the cognitive scientists, Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach, who wrote the book and whose ideas we're going to try to unpack and make a little sense out of. I chose their book because of how it answers the question, what on earth is going on, and how it explains a great deal about the human story today. It's easy to think of ourselves as independent, self-contained, and fully functioning individuals that interact with others and with a wider group to varying degrees, kind of like an atom bouncing off of others, attracted and repelled, squished and expanded, but always indivisible. The authors are telling us, indeed I think they're showing us, that human beings learn, think, and remember communally. We live in a community of knowledge in which cognitive labor is divided because our brains are quite simply too limited to know what human civilization as a whole needs to know. As a result, certain people know certain things at certain levels, and it's only in bringing this knowledge together that we as a society can work. If you think of cement, you might know its chemical composition, or how to make it, or how to pour it, or how to design a building with it, or its detailed history, or statistics of its use, or how to incorporate it into a work of art. Maybe you know only that cement is how some things are built. Maybe you know almost nothing at all about it. But chances are you do not know all of the different aspects of cement in intimate detail. And if you do, if you're the world's greatest all-time expert in cement, then you almost certainly are not well-versed in, say, plumbing or carpentry or computer engineering or you name it. According to Sloman and Fernbach, every day we operate under the illusion of our own individual knowledge, telling ourselves that we are the center of our own story. In fact, we might even need this illusion because the world around us is so full of nuance and intricacy, and it's only possible for us to understand our existence by dividing us against everything else, by trying to separate our knowledge from the knowledge of others. Here's a quote from the book. "We tolerate complexity by failing to recognize it. That's the illusion of understanding." Close quote. We forget that being smart is kind of like being a librarian, to know where to find the information when we need it, and to know when the information is trustworthy and when it is not. Anyways, here's my conversation this week with Sean. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. All right, I'm here with Sean Fenlon in Kingston, Ontario. We're going to talk about The Knowledge Illusion, Why We Never Think Alone. That's a book by Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but this was a fascinating book for me, Sean. Welcome to the program, by the way.
Thanks for having me.
Maybe I should have said that first.
Oh, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to chat about this book. Generally, before I ask you the first question, which is always the same, what on earth is going on according to this book? Just a quick sort of thesis statement from the book. And this is a quote from The Knowledge Illusion. How is it possible that people can simultaneously bowl us over with their ingenuity and disappoint us with their ignorance? How have we mastered so much despite how limited our understanding often is? These are the questions we will try to answer in this book. So what I'm going to ask you in a sec is, how do they answer those questions? And then we can talk about the implications of this book in our world, how it maybe has changed the way that we think about the world around us, because it certainly has changed and affected the way that I perceive not only the world, but my own knowledge of the world, and that I am actually quite ignorant. So this is a question that you're probably more prepared to answer than anyone listening to the program. The question is, before I get to what on earth is going on, how would you rate, from a scale of 1 to 7, your understanding of this book?
That's a tough one, especially because, as you say, I know how loaded a question that is at this point. I'd like to rate it relatively highly, but as I know, my understanding probably is not as thorough as maybe I'd like to believe. Let's go somewhere in the middle. Let's say like a 3.5 or something.
Wicked. As you know, I'm going to ask you the same question at the end of this conversation, because that is the knowledge illusion, essentially, that we think we know more than we actually know. And the knowledge illusion is based on the illusion of explanatory depth, right? That if you ask someone a question about how much they know something, and then you ask them to describe it in intimate, coherent detail, and then you ask them again after they've done that how well they understand it, usually their rating will drop. And we'll see if our ratings drop. My rating, I'd say, is like 3. I'm with you, but let's see how our ratings match up at the end of the program. So, Sean, what on earth is going on according to the knowledge illusion?
Well, that's another tough and loaded question, of course. But I think that idea that you sort of touched upon in that quote there, in their sort of thesis statement, let's say, that's a big part of it, that paradox, that people are sort of at once ignorant and yet capable of very intelligent, very, complicated things or tasks or whatever. And so in terms of what on earth is going on today, my takeaway was that really plays into our sort of social media bubbles and our echo chambers of thought and discourse and things like that. Because if you extend that knowledge illusion, that illusion of explanatory depth, to sort of everything, well, then people, as Sloman and Fernbach, I hope we're pronouncing those correct, touched upon, people extend that to sort of their political opinions, their cultural and social views. And so they can hold these opinions that aren't necessarily as justified or as grounded as they actually should be, or as they'd like to think they are, kind of thing.
It seems like the thesis of the book is that we know a lot, actually, but we only know those things through other people and through the world around us. We don't actually store a lot of information in our brain, even if we think we do. They quote, I can't remember his name is Lawrence something, saying that the brain really only has about 1 gigabyte of storage, really. And I think in the 1980s or 1990s, that was a lot. But today, that's nothing. That's a fraction of a flash drive that we can actually store in our minds. What we store and what we're able to do in our minds is causal reasoning. So we can make up a story about the way things work and fill in the details. It's almost like we're looking at the world
as if we're pieces of a skeleton. We only fill it in when we need to. And the knowledge is contained again in other people. In our world today, it's contained on the internet. Of course, it's been contained in books for a long, long time. But the illusion is that we actually think we know all of this stuff. And if most people are asked, and the classic example in the book is, define for me how a zipper works. First of all, how well do you think you know how a zipper works? And a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, 6 or 5 or even 7. And then, of course, you ask them to explain it. And after that, they're like 1 or 2 because they have no idea. Most people have no idea how a toilet works. We use it every day.
That was my my favorite sort of classic example that they kept coming back to because, yeah, I was in exactly that boat that I wouldn't have rated my understanding of how a toilet works especially high, let's say. But in terms of the precise physics of it, the exact mechanics of it or whatever, I didn't understand how they worked. And once they were explained to me, it's like, wow, I didn't realize that was exactly how it worked, the sort of pressure differential or whatever. So, yeah, I was in the same boat as everyone else with that particular one.
Right. And when we finally accept the fact that there is this community of knowledge, which they keep coming back to, that we think communally, and that there is knowledge stored in our entire species, in our civilization, and of course in the objects around us. When we accept that, it may liberate us, but it may also make us feel like we aren't nearly what we thought we were. And it also belittles the idea of the great geniuses of history. I mean, of course, Albert Einstein was a genius, but he didn't know all of the facts all of the time. He had to pull them from different sources in order to come up with the things he came up with. The genius of someone is almost in being a librarian, according to this book, that you know where things are located outside of your brain and within your brain, rather than just storing them all. I think there's a term. Is it hyperthermia or hyperthymesia, which is someone who has extraordinary memory. They remember almost everything. But the problem with this is that someone with hyperthymesia, I'm saying that correctly, is that if you remember everything, then you're almost incapable of seeing the forest for the trees. You can't actually make up the assumptions about your world because you're dealing with so much detail. And so the advantage that human beings have as a species seems to be that we can make up these connecting forces, and we can create ideas that bind things together so that we don't have to remember all of the different trees, and that we can see and remember the forest instead.
Well, and that's a very sort of broad and philosophical, let's say, way of looking at it. But in a concrete way, what kept coming back to me as my background as a historian is that this sort of double-edged sword is what makes civilization and everything around us sort of possible. That, on the one hand, none of us knows the workings of everything, but because we can all specialize in something, we can get all of the incredible things done that are around us. Like, even with the toilet example, we don't all have to know how a toilet works to use one and have it improve our lives. Same with our phones and the microphones we're recording this on and everything, it's all based around that sort of community of knowledge. So yeah, our ignorance is sort of a double-edged sword. It's enabled all of that as well.
For sure. I mean, you can get through life without really knowing much about anything. But one of the things that they talk about in the book is that things are becoming more and more complicated, and the more and more complicated they become, the less and less we know. Even the designers and engineers of something know less and less about the products they create, because so much of them are created by computers, and in the future by narrow artificial intelligence, maybe general AI, will know how things are made. You can 3D print something quite well because of the knowledge stored in the computer doing the printing. But the person overseeing it might have no idea what the angles and ins and outs and contours of that thing is. Do you think that is dangerous, or do you think that is a positive aspect of our ongoing evolution?
Well, that's really the big question, I guess, isn't it? It is. I think it's both. Unfortunately, it's got positives and negatives, as the illusion of knowledge and everything does in general. I think there's a lot of good things coming that, again, technologically or whatever, that people don't necessarily have to understand to, again, make use of or have improved their lives.
Yeah.
But there's also, going to be issues with that, and we're already seeing that with in a very minor sort of way with say people's smartphones, people's iPhones and stuff when they break down and nobody knows how to fix them.
Yeah.
And you either have to take them to the iPhone place and pay an arm and a leg just to replace the battery or the screen or whatever, or you basically have to buy a whole new phone or something. So that's sort of minor in scope or compared to what it could be, but that's the kind of issue that we may run into, I guess, if nobody really knows how things work in any detail. They just know sort of generalities about things.
Right. I mean, it's interesting because humans have evolved in complete lockstep with technology. As technology expands and is enhanced, so too we are expanded and enhanced. But that even goes to biological terms, so that when human beings invented, or you could say invented or discovered fire and started cooking food as opposed to eating food raw, that greatly expanded the calorie count that they could eat per day. And as the calories grew that you could get into your diet, so therefore the humans that could ingest more calories had an advantage over those who couldn't, and therefore those ones were the ones who evolved into modern humans, and the ones who couldn't get those calories into them didn't, or couldn't invent fire or use fire and start cooking. And therefore the brain, which is a high calorie user in the human body, was able to grow as a result of that invention. I don't know if we've evolved, obviously, since the agricultural revolution, and especially not the industrial revolution. But because we've been so close with technology throughout the last, say, 200,000 years of human evolution or more, do you think that now as technology is becoming not only incredibly powerful in our lives, but it seems like it's further away from us in terms of the detail with how we use it? Do you think that gap is becoming wider? Or do you think that we've always had this illusion that we understand the technology that's around us, and in fact it's not getting wider?
Well, I'm sure there has always been that illusion there, whatever sort of piece of technology you want to go back to. People probably didn't understand, the general public, as they probably didn't understand exactly how a printing press worked
right.
hundreds of years ago, or, you could pick just about anything. But certainly, I would say the gap is getting wider in terms of many of the things like our smartphones, again, that sort of, populate our daily lives, or even our cars are becoming more computer based, and that's even leaving aside the idea of automation or anything like that. Even your average car is getting more computer based and harder for someone to just tinker around with and mess with. So yeah, I think that gap is definitely increasing, and that's by design in some cases, I think. Like a company like Apple, I think, wants people to just have a product that it's easy for them to use, easy for them to crack the box open and get started with, and that they hopefully will never have to worry about the technical details of how it works, because hopefully in their mind it will just work.
Well, it's like agreeing to the terms and conditions. That's almost a cliche now, but we do it every single day. We agree to the terms and conditions of a certain product, but we are expected to be held to account if there is some kind of issue between us and the terms and conditions and us and the company. And this is another aspect they talk about in the book of your legal duties, that the classic line that ignorance is no excuse for the law. And yet we know that nobody, not the best judge or lawyer in the world or law professor, can know every law of a single country or even a single province or state or a single county. There's no way that the human brain can know all of this stuff, and yet you are expected to follow every single law to the letter. So how is that possible for us as humans to do? And I think the book tries to explain that we actually operate as human beings in this community of knowledge, and we have certain things that our species is good at. One word that they use a lot is intentionality. And it's something that, many books try to explain how human beings are separate from animals, and this book is no exception. And their explanation is that two animals can have the same goal, but they don't share the goal. They don't share the thought about the goal. What human beings can do that nothing else can do, is that we can share the same thought. So if a mother and a child are building a sandcastle, they are not only doing this, they're not only building sand on top of sand and building something that we all can understand as a castle, but they're thinking of what it is that they're doing is the same. They're sharing the same thought at the same time. It's called intentionality, and that's something that human beings can do that no animal can do, even if animals can hunt together. Wolves can hunt together, but what human beings can do is not just hunt together, but then when the hunt is finished, they know how to skin the buffalo, and they know how to dissect the buffalo and take the parts that matter, and they know how to pass knowledge on to the next generation and teach them how to use the buffalo for its best uses. And this is something that human beings are able to do, and also explains the world that's around us today. And I think that when we're reading this book, the knowledge illusion, what they're trying to say, Sloman and Fernbach, is not just that we're stupid and that we should realize how ignorant we are, but that there is an advantage to this community of knowledge, that there is a real power there that we have yet to unlock. And if we're aware of it, we're aware of the illusion, but also aware of this community of knowledge, we may be able to succeed in ways we haven't thought possible, but also overcome a lot of the issues that currently face our civilization, our society, especially Western society, and the things that you were talking about.
Yeah, it's definitely, I think, a case of not necessarily calling out just, how dumb we are and how ignorant we are, but that there is possibility there. And there is, as I was saying, that thus far we have benefited greatly from the double-edged nature of it and from the positive aspects of it. And I think you're right that there is a lot more potential there to both benefit further and to overcome some of those kind of drawbacks or limitations of our ignorance and our, by necessity, living within this sort of community of knowledge and having our understanding reside sort of outside of our heads. Like I was saying earlier with sort of biases and thought discourse kind of echo chambers and bubbles. The first it's like the first step to getting help is admitting you have a problem kind of thing. Like if we can first realize that this is sort of part of our ignorance, we can at least try to work to overcome it.
There is something fascinating that I underlined 3 times in the book when I came across it. And the authors of the book reference a study that they did, that someone else did, about the use of the internet in finding information. And they said that when people go onto the internet and they look up the most basic stuff, they can look up, again, how a toilet works, or they can just spend time learning about how to do their taxes or something. It could be anything. Whatever you do when you're surfing the internet and you're surrounded by information. If they ask those people how well they understand, say, politics or policy issues at the beginning, and at the end they ask them the same question, and while they were searching the internet, the people spent no time looking at politics and policy issues, 0 time, they will feel more capable of answering those policy and political questions at the end of their internet search time than at the beginning, even though they were exposed to no extra information and they spent no extra time thinking about it. They will feel more qualified to enter into the conversation. That, to me, was a profound insight. Maybe it's right, maybe it's wrong, but it seems to be a pretty profound insight into why people think that they're experts now in everything. And that we have an incredible polarization in our politics, both in Canada and the United States. It seems to be in the entire Western world, maybe the entire world, where everyone seems to think that they're the expert. They don't need a doctor's advice. They don't want to vote the way their parents did. They don't believe in political parties. There are advantages to this, but there's also disadvantages to this. I guess my question to you on this one would be, do you think that insight is as strong as I'm making it out to be? Do you think that might explain why people lack trust in their institutions and there seems to be an erosion of these shared ideas because everyone thinks that they know, because they spend so much time in this knowledge warehouse, if you will?
Oh, I definitely think there is at least some merit to that. We could go back and forth all day about the degree to which that's true, but I think it's certainly true to a degree, that we just have so much information at our fingertips these days in whatever medium you want. Even if you want a physical something, a physical book or something, we're surrounded by information, and the superficiality, I guess, of that exposure people sort of feel like or intuit that translates to understanding or translates to comprehension in the same way, but it doesn't really, just because you're familiar with the topic, let's say. It's not the same as, or you've read, which I confess to being very guilty of. I get lost in Wikipedia all the time and learning about weird and wild things that I never would have thought to read about otherwise. And I definitely will sometimes think that I understand whatever now better than I do because I've spent a bit of time on Wikipedia, and such is not necessarily always the case, especially with Wikipedia, but with the internet and our wealth of knowledge these days in general. So I think that's definitely a potential issue. As I say, the degree to which it is, who knows?
Right.
It probably varies on who you talk to.
Well, they say later in the book that familiarity does not equal understanding. But the illusion is, one of the knowledge illusions are, I guess, that we think it does. We think that if I'm familiar with something, I therefore must understand it. But if I'm asked to explain my understanding, I realize I don't. I don't know how that toilet works, and I don't know how these bricks were laid to construct the room that we're sitting in. I have no idea. But my causal understanding, that is a feature of my brain, assumes that I can find out, and it assumes that it all makes sense. And therefore, until I need to come to that, I will assume that it is all okay. And in fact, that's an advantage, because I think there's a line in the book that the reason that we can tolerate complexity is that we ignore the actual complexity
that's there,
and tell the story about it. Yeah.
That was one of the lines that I noted as well, that it's sort of the only way that we can get around the complexity of the world around us is essentially by ignoring it, by telling ourselves either that it's not there, or that it's less complex, or that we understand the complexity, or whatever narrative we like to sort of get us through.
Yeah. Did you find that this is obviously a popular science book in a way, or a popular thinking book, but it's based on a lot of research. These guys, both of them, are cognitive scientists. They seem to have done their homework. Were you persuaded by their research? Were you persuaded that this is actually empirically proven, what their thesis is? Or do you think that there were holes in it? How are you persuaded by it?
I would say I was relatively persuaded by it. I mean, to say that it is empirically proven is a let's say a tall order. But I think that as I say, I think they're relatively correct, and that fact was sort of profound for me, because in a sense it's a very basic and fundamental thing to assert, that people know less than they do.
Yeah.
In the time that I have spent preparing for this show, and reading the book and telling people I was reading this book, kind of thing, and people asking me what it was about, and me giving them basically that thesis statement, that that's what it's about. Everybody was sort of like, yeah, no, that's the case. And it's obvious when you sort of think about it.
Right.
And especially when you spend a book's time unpacking it, it seems very persuasive an idea. They've got studies and sort of information. But the sort of paradox, or whatever, if you want to call it that, of it is that we take it completely for granted. We don't ever actually consider our ignorance and consider that we know less than we do. When you present people with it, as I say, when I presented people around me with it, they were like, yeah, no, I know less than I do. I don't know how a zipper works or a toilet works or whatever. But they had never thought of it before. It had never occurred to them. They never needed to.
Right.
And that's the thing.
Yeah, I think there was a review in The Guardian or the New York Times, I can't remember, which said that this is a book that has a thesis that is both obvious and profound.
Exactly, yeah.
Which for me is sometimes the best kind of thesis, because it means it's real, it's self-evident, but it's also meaningful. And same with you. I mean, when I was telling people about this book, they would say, well, obviously, I don't know everything. But the thesis of the book is not that you don't know everything. It's that you think you know things that you don't, and that you don't realize where you're pulling your knowledge from day to day, and that there is such a thing as a sort of communal intelligence. And that's actually one thing they bring up in the book about intelligence and intelligence testing. That a lot of intelligence testing is testing the individual and how good they are at pursuing and achieving their own personal goals. But really, if our species is more like a hive than it is a collection of individuals, if the hive mind, so to speak, this community of knowledge is such a central aspect, then what they're arguing is that the best way to measure intelligence is how well we contribute to our group's success, whether that's a group at work or a tribe or an entire state, a nation. How well do we contribute to the group itself? Which means that I can contribute in a very, very different way. And this is another line that they use consistently in the book, that there is a division of cognitive labor amongst humanity. And that division of cognitive labor, which I think is actually something that Yuval Noah Harari calls the cognitive revolution from 70,000 years ago, when human beings were able to do different tasks in the service of the group, but know that they were sharing those thoughts together. So instead of like bees, where a single bee is just doing its thing, it's not sharing a thought with the queen. But humans do share thoughts. That intentionality again, and the division of cognitive labor is such a central aspect to this book. Do you think that, did you find that persuasive as well, that that this intentionality and division of cognitive labor is really what we can grab from being human?
I think so, and it is definitely the thing, that the takeaway that we, I guess that we have to take away from this book, that, you know, this is our strength.
Right.
That if we want to look at our ignorance or the illusion of understanding that we have as a weakness, then our strength is that our cognitive labor is divided.
Yeah.
You know, they mention a number of times the idea that humans are sort of built to collaborate and built to work together. And going back to that idea that you just mentioned about the testing of intelligence, that perhaps we should be testing people's intelligence as a collaborative unit rather than as individuals, sort of very much speaks to that. And I think that sort of there's a grain of truth there, or there's some sense there, that if humans are indeed built to collaborate and built to work together, built to be social beings, then our intelligence is going to be greater than the sum of its parts, so to speak, because that's just what we're wired for. We're not wired to have everything in our own heads.
Yeah, and we can take this from the book, that we're more capable than we think we are, even if we're dumber than we sometimes think we are. What are some aspects of the book that you found thought-provoking that I haven't really touched on yet? Like what were things that made you put down the book and think for a second about what that meant for your life, and of course, what on earth is going on around you in the world today?
Well, I think one of the main things that I've been mentioning a couple of times is the idea that we're all, especially these days, we're all trapped in our own bubbles of whatever kind of thought you want. I mean, it comes up a lot these days in reference to politics or things like that, but whatever kind of thought you want to talk about, we're all sort of isolated in these bubbles, in these echo chambers, despite the connectivity of the internet. So that was a big sort of thing for me to sort of sit down and realize, we all sort of have work to do on that, regardless of how much that there is. And then the other sort of big one for me in this one was, as I say, from my background as a historian, to sort of look at this as, yes, this is both sort of necessary and part of humanity, of humans, and also a good thing and part of how civilization has developed, how it's going to continue to develop. That it's not just a drawback, it's not just a bad thing.
So you've talked a lot about the bubbles that we operate in, the echo chambers, whether that's of Facebook and Twitter or of the internet at large, the increasing polarization of our society and our politics, and the seemingly dangerous time that we live in. Partly because people, the flat earth movement, for example, which has thousands and thousands of people, maybe even more, who really do believe that the earth is flat and are looking for evidence and discount any real evidence that is provided in their face. And they're kind of hijacking a principle of democratic society, which is that not only are you right to say anything you want, but we also should debate it as if it were equal to the other side.
That's as much as I love technology and the internet and all of that. That's been one of my problems with the internet for years, is the sort of democratization of it, in the sense that you now sure, you give everyone and everything, every idea, a voice, But as you just sort of alluded to, you essentially give them equal weight. If they're all just out there on the internet, you sort of make all things equally valid. If you essentially, I don't know, level the playing field or something. So yeah, people can look at something like flat Earth and go, well, it's out there and there's all this evidence. So I mean, there must be a certain amount of validity to it, whether or not it's absolutely true.
Right.
And then we get into sort of echo chamber sort of type stuff. You then don't have to, because of the plethora of information of all stripes out there, you don't have to necessarily interact with countermanding evidence if you don't want to.
Yeah.
You can stick to the flat Earth stuff, and you can read a variety of it. You could read countermanding flat Earth stuff if you wanted to, and just stay in that headspace.
Right.
And that's troubling and dangerous when it's something, like whether the Earth is round or not, or whether climate change is occurring, or it's one thing when you're talking about what the best movie is or what the best band is or something, but there are certain discussions where it has ramifications to be in a bubble.
Well, there's a lot of scholars and public figures who have said that one of the greater threats to our civilization when it comes to climate change, but also to our democracy, is the sense that the idea that we share ideas and share thoughts and know that those thoughts are the same is becoming disrupted in and of itself. That we don't share the same idea anymore because we don't read the same newspaper. We don't get the same news. So someone on the other side of the political spectrum from you and I will read a completely different source of information, and they will get different news. They will get a different sense of what's happening in the world. Their answer to what on earth is going on would be fundamentally different because their information is different. Their community of knowledge is different. And one of the threats of social media, of course, is the fact that when you are seeing people who believe in the flat earth movement on your social media feed, most likely they're friends of yours, they're family. I mean, it's the classic problem of religion or any ideological beliefs, which is that, well, my father and mother believe this, so how do I not believe it? Because my belief in it is almost my duty as a member of my group, of my family, of my tribe. And they actually reference Jonathan Haidt in the book and his work as a moral psychologist, and how someone's beliefs aren't just because they've rationalized it. In fact, some beliefs, especially if they're moral beliefs, or their sacred beliefs, have nothing to do with justification. And no justification can move them away from it because it's something far deeper to the core. Say, a belief in a pro-life versus pro-choice stance. Most people on either side of that debate, it's not about rationalization or justification anymore. It's partly because of their community. It's also because they've decided that something is right or wrong. And no one coming in and telling them the facts matter, because the facts don't matter for that person.
Well, and that's the sort of let's say the scariest thing to take away from this book is that some of those issues or discussions or whatever are going to be intractable or going to be not solvable from the perspective of illuminating people to this knowledge illusion. I think at least that Sloman and Fernbach sort of idea is that if people were generally aware of their ignorance, their lack of understanding or whatever, and that they're a part of this community of knowledge, that hopefully we can steer things in the direction of making use of it.
Right.
But some of those issues and some of those discussions are not going to be affected by that, even if everybody does acknowledge and accept that they're part of a community of knowledge and makes use of it all the time. Whether or not they're pro-life or pro-choice is not necessarily going to be affected by that at all.
So what do you make of the author's proposals to solve some of these problems that they have in the book? Like, what do you take from what they recommend we do in light of the knowledge illusion?
I don't know if I have an answer to that one, because it's so hard to move societies, cultures. It's so hard to move large groups of people, especially in this day and age, with everyone being both very interconnected and yet potentially isolated, in the sense that you can move one group of bubbles or echo chambers and not another.
Right.
I don't know whether the thing we should keep in mind is the whole you can't change the world, you can only change yourself sort of mentality. That we should all take this to heart and sort of look at it in our own individual lives and try and make use of the community of knowledge, or however you want to frame it. I don't know. maybe I'd turn that one back to you. Do you have an answer for that one?
Well, no, I mean, yeah, in a way I do, because I've read a few reviews of this book, and the constant theme of those reviews are, hey, great book, obvious yet profound, but your solutions are poor and not sufficient for a book of this size. And I think it was it might have been the New York Times. No, sorry, it was the Economist, which said that this book is taking a Ptolemaic approach to its subject. In other words, it's treating the knowledge illusion as central to all things. If you want to understand psychology or philosophy or economics or anything at all, then the knowledge illusion is your central theme of everything. And so it takes this Ptolemaic approach in the way that, Ptolemy put the Earth at the center of the universe. And we now know that was mistaken. And what a lot of these reviews are saying is that the solutions in this book are short. Maybe it's because the authors don't know, and frankly, I don't know either. I don't know what the solution is. Generally, what the authors are saying is, be aware that there is an illusion to your knowledge, and try to understand that we are functioning as a group. And when it comes to, for example, climate change denial, if anyone who is studying the facts of the matter knows that climate change is real and it's caused by human beings, right? That is just the truth of empirical data and of reasoning and science. But we know that for a lot of people that has no significance and relevance to their lives, and they don't care and they still don't buy it, and you can say it until you're blue in the face. And a lot of scholars back in the 1980s and 70s believed that the way to fix ignorance was education, was to provide new information. So if someone doesn't understand that, for example, one of the references in the book is what a antibiotic does. So an antibiotic only attacks bacteria. It has nothing to do with viruses. But maybe 50% of people don't know that. They have no idea that that's the reality. They think it is both for viruses and bacteria, if they can even differentiate between a virus and a bacteria. Is it important for people to know that? Probably not. But the older view is that it is. It is important to know this, and the only way you're going to educate people is to just pump them full of information. But what the book is saying is you can't pump everybody full of information if you only have 1 gigabyte of data per person. So there must be a different perspective. And what the guys in the book are saying is that we need to practice and train our ability to reason and be critical about the world around us. But my question then to you would be, and because this is something that I thought in the book, okay, great, so we need more critical thinking. As we've talked about all the time, every day in school, teachers would say, exercise your critical thinking, become independent thinkers, and the same is true in university. I don't know of a place where that is not said. But then, is that not part of the problem? That we all think that we're experts in critical thinking and can decide what facts matter for us and which don't. We can decide which knowledge is important and which is not. Do you think that this sense that we're all supposed to be critical thinking experts, every single one of us, is a bit of the problem today?
I think that there is certainly, there is certainly merit to that, because all of that sort of exists on a spectrum, let's say, and you could be too critical, let's say. You could be, critical of everything and not accepting of anything, even that community of knowledge that is sort of ultimately, whether you like it or not, sort of more intelligent than you, more understanding than you, just by virtue of numbers and being that community of knowledge. So you could potentially be too critical. And there's also I was just thinking that there's also the danger of becoming, when told to think critically about everything, you are in danger of breeding a whole bunch of cynics, then a whole bunch of cynical who cares, kind of laissez-faire, let the world burn at the most extreme, but cynics, people who, as I say, think critically about everything and are accepting of nothing. There's potential danger in that.
Well, if you're an anthropologist and you look back, again, going back to the hunt of the buffalo, right? If every single person hunting the buffalo is a cynic, you're probably not going to get the buffalo. Yeah. You're probably not even going to go hunt. And you're probably not going to continue much longer as a group. Yeah. And this, I think you're perfectly right that if we're a culture of everyone, where everybody is a cynic on their own, that doesn't lead to the benefit of the greater group. But then what's the alternative? To go against the rise of individualism in Western society, which is for many people a hallmark of everything that we have built. What's the answer here?
I don't know. I guess it's, as I say, maybe it is sort of to find some kind of middle ground on the sort of spectrum there, that without being too critical or questioning of everything, but without being too, I don't know what the other opposite end is, too idealistic, too accepting of everything, too trusting. I don't know, but there's got to be some kind of balance in all things, I guess. Right?
Yeah. Well, especially if we are not only citizens of countries, but citizens of the internet, citizens of the digital world. I mean, what are our rights and responsibilities as members of that group, not just as individual atoms playing with other atoms in this ecosystem? Do we have rights and responsibilities? Is this something that we need to think about more clearly in light of the fact that knowledge is not exclusive to my mind, but shared with others and shared with my environment?
Well, there's an aspect of that you just mentioned that I think is either already is or is going to be a fundamental question, and that's the idea of sort of rights and responsibilities as digital citizens, let's say. I mean,
right.
Just thinking about, say, cyberbullying or something like that, trolling online, things like that. I mean, currently, if you do something like that to someone in the physical world, in the real world, that's a crime potentially. There are ramifications and there are rights and responsibilities sort of associated with that. But things are still much grayer on the internet, much more Wild West, much more amorphous as yet. And I think that's going to be a question that we are asking and that we're going to have to ask is, what rights do we have? Do we have a responsibility to behave in a certain way? Should we just not be jerks on the internet? Do those things extend to online that at least some people hold, extend to the physical world?
Yeah.
Courtesy or whatever norm you want to pick.
Yeah. So here's a thought experiment. If you are on your computer tomorrow morning and you get an email saying that the rulers of the internet have decreed that there are this new list of rules and responsibilities, and everybody is responsible for knowing them and following them, and you read the rules and responsibilities and they seemed, decent to you, what would you think about that? Do you think, I know that I'm exaggerating here and I know that I'm pulling something ridiculous out of a hat, but if rules and responsibilities were imposed upon you without your input, how would you feel about that? How would you take that? How would you react?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I think on the face of it, we all, as like you said, as good sort of Western individualists with a capital I, want to sort of buck against that and rebel against that a little bit. The flip side of that being the good critical thinker that I am, I guess, I would wonder how, and I know this, you just conjured this hypothetical situation, but how would, with something like the internet, how would rules be imposed from on high at all? The rules would necessarily have to come from all of us, wouldn't they?
Well, not necessarily. I mean, if you
hopefully, although net neutrality and that being what it is.
But also, if you see what state actors like China are doing,
that's true. That's true.
Garnering further and further control over the internet, where privacy and independence and the feeling that you are doing things in secret is now an illusion in and of itself. That if a large corporation or a government wants to know who's saying these things, they can probably find out now. And so, I know it's hypothetical, but I guess the point of the question it would be, is it important for you to be consulted? And is that consultation on, say, rules and responsibilities of you being on the internet, is that consultation just to make you feel good about it? Is it just to make you feel part of the group? Or is there an actual benefit from having you input or having you say, I'm not part of this, I'm stepping out, I refuse to obey?
Yeah, I don't know if there's actual benefit, let's say, intellectually from having my input or the input of every individual or whatever. But you certainly hit the nail on the head in a psychological or emotional sense or whatever, that we all want to feel
Yeah.
Again, as whether it's because we live in democracies or just because we are sort of taught to be individuals or whatever, but we all want to feel that we have a voice and that our voice counts and matters, and more than that is being heard, that someone is
Right.
listening, that we're not just shouting into the wind,
Yeah.
that someone is listening and taking note or account or whatever. So I don't know, as I say, intellectually what the value might be. Even from that's me as an individual saying that. I don't know whether you get any value out of asking my opinion on a question like that. But emotionally, I want to have my voice heard.
Right. Right. And I think, the way that I think this tracks back to the book is being in this community of knowledge. It's a community of billions of people now. It's a community, actually, of more people than are just alive, because we have people who are dead,
Oh, certainly,
who
yeah.
still have a very, in a way, active presence on the internet. And so we have billions and billions of voices. If I am cut out of it, it really doesn't make much of a difference. I mean, the flock, the herd goes on. The hunt for the buffalo continues whether I'm there or not, because there's so many people. There's so many constituent parts of this thing that's going on. So how, knowing, I mean, this is maybe why the book to people is obvious yet profound, and they'd never thought about it before, is because in our individualistic culture, we don't think about things this way, but maybe it would have been apparent and not worthy of saying 100 years ago, 500 years ago. Maybe the people who hunted buffalo hundreds of years ago knew this already. They knew this. They didn't have a knowledge illusion. Maybe the knowledge illusion that I think I know things better than I really do is a more recent phenomenon.
There probably is a bit of, let's say, scale playing a factor there, in terms of scale. Because you're right, thinking back to the buffalo hunt, say, probably everybody in the tribe, tens of thousands of years ago, whatever, I would imagine anyways, maybe I'm faulty in my understanding, but I would imagine that they had a much firmer grasp on their personal knowledge within the community, their personal role within the community, and what wasn't theirs, that I can do this, but I can't do this, and this, and that's why we have to go to so and so in the village or the tribe or whatever. They're the priest, the healer, the whatever it happens to be, the tailor. Once you start specializing all kinds of things, the farmer, who knows what. But I think when your community is smaller, when let's say your community of knowledge is smaller, it maybe is much simpler or easier to have a better grasp of your role within it, of your place within it, and the limitations of your role and place within it.
Well, and for most people, up until, say, the Industrial Revolution, social mobility was not possible. Your station was your station.
Social and physical mobility, you weren't moving around a whole lot potentially either.
Yeah, right. And that therefore the knowledge illusion comes part and parcel with, whether it's the illusion or the reality, that my role in this world, both physically and socially, is malleable and is dependent on my choices. So if I go out and start a business and do very well and become successful and become a millionaire, well, then that is my doing. According to the philosophy that around which our world is structured, then that is my doing, and I've achieved that regardless of any community that's around me. Whereas 300 years ago, my station was my station, and it was almost morally wrong to leave my station and to assume that I could be someone who I wasn't. And therefore, that would mean to assume that I had knowledge that I wasn't privy to. I mean, nobody before, say, the Renaissance would really argue with the fact that the monks should have their books in their monastery and the people shouldn't really have access to that. And there were, the peasants' revolt of 1381 was all about burning the rolls which listed who owned what in England. I mean, what a fascinating concept that paper and knowledge as put on paper could have so much power over people that they would try to storm castles and burn it. Forget the people, because the paper was what was given power. I mean, the knowledge illusion and the community of knowledge has been with us for a long time. I guess what I'm trying to get at is maybe it's become more, the illusion itself has become more concise and omnipresent in our culture.
and much more, I don't know, visible and prominent maybe. But I would agree that there probably has been a reality to it for as long as people have been, built to collaborate, have been living in communities and in communities of knowledge. But yeah, again, the bigger our societies get, and then the further we get, sort of, I guess technologically or whatever, the more it seems to become omnipresent and seems to become obvious that we have this, that it's there, this knowledge illusion, this illusion of explanatory depth, or whatever one of the terms from the book you want to use. It becomes more increasingly obvious that it's there, that it is both a problem and a benefit, and that there is this community of knowledge.
Right.
I would say that it's always probably been that way.
Right. Sean, what have we missed in this conversation as we come to the end? What's something that we haven't talked about that maybe you wish we had? Maybe you could take 2 minutes now to talk about. What is something that we haven't hit upon yet?
I don't know if there's anything that we haven't hit upon.
100% success.
At least in terms of stuff that I was thinking of. There is a great deal to potentially unpack from this book, and once you start going off, as people will have heard by now, once you start going off on the various tangents that you can from thinking about how limited our knowledge is and the community of knowledge and all of those kinds of issues. I mean, we could be here all day potentially, but I think we've covered it relatively well.
Okay, so on a scale of 1 to 7,
I knew you were coming back to that. Yeah.
What would on a scale of 1 to 7, how well do you understand this book?
I think I'm still going to be conservative and say that my understanding hasn't increased much numerically or quantifiably. I would say maybe I have a different understanding. But again, I think this is the kind of topic that if I were to come back to this book, say a year from now, and reread it, or 2 years from, after a period of time, I think my understanding of it and my interaction of it would probably be different. And,
right.
I might rate it differently. So I'm still going to probably say something like a 3 or 3.5 or somewhere in the middle. I very much like to admit my ignorance and admit how much there is that I don't know.
So mine has actually gone up, and I just asked myself the same question, and it's your doing. So congratulations.
Well, thank you.
But and maybe I'm actually suffering from the illusion at this very moment. But I'd say I'm up to like 4.5 or 5.
Well, great.
Which is probably totally wrong. But the reason for that, I think, is because I've just spent 45 minutes talking to you about it. I've just been thinking about it. But I think, moreover, what might be happening to me is that I'm using your brain as an extension of my brain.
Exactly.
And I'm actually practicing this community of knowledge right here and now. And if both of us know all this stuff about this book, then my knowledge is, of course, enhanced. But I didn't ask myself what both of us know. I asked what I know. But I still feel like I know more and that my understanding is deeper. So, yeah.
Which is fundamentally a very interesting conclusion to take away from this book and a conversation about it, that your knowledge and understanding is enhanced through use of the community of knowledge rather than through sticking with your own illusion of knowledge, your own illusion of explanatory depth.
They should put a warning on the cover. Say, don't talk about this book or your illusion will be magnified. Sean, thanks so much for doing this. This has been terrific.
Well, thanks very much for having me.
Cool.
That's the show. Remember that you can find all previous episodes on the website, www.wogoshow.com. That's WOEGO show.com. And at that website, you can also find links to social media, where I hope you will share this show, tell everybody about it, and of course, give me your feedback, your suggestions for future episodes. Now, your quote of the week was a bit of a challenge. There are a lot of good quotes out there about ignorance and knowledge, but I stuck with one from the 18th century French philosopher Voltaire. It goes, "Illusion is the first of all pleasures." Thanks for listening. Hey, just a quick note to let you know that this show was originally broadcast on CFRC 101.9 FM in Kingston, Ontario, Canada, and that you can also catch it every Tuesday on CHMR in St. John's, Newfoundland. Thanks again.